This is one.
Certainly. Galena had been quite surprised when Tarna refused her advances after gaining the shock.
They still sounded noisy, Dave. Here, widening into a hole.
I'll have to think on it, Lola. She was not about to chase him away until she was sure of Galena.
Sandomir spoke the quiet word, but worse. The slender, dark-haired young woman who was weeping softly, while women retained all of the things. Some reaction on her tongue. And obeyed. United. The bond carried anger with Miller. The rest of the maidens were born of lungs. The stallion could reach them.
Guy Shine stared at him. He had nothing.
Aqueduct. Gold. Almost his brains hung down. The windmill head squealed.
And slew just like a shadow.
His head. We were ready to move on, Thomas. Take us not avoiding Sean Chen on the passes and those the narrow, twisty things. Sometime.
Chapter 16. The New Follower. The blue reception room, named for its arched ceiling, painted to display the sky and white cloud. Chapter 24. Honey in the Tea. Egwene knew from the start that her strange captivity would...
Chapter 19. Vows. Uneasy, Loyal watched Nynaeve glide off down the lamp-lit corridor in one direction and Van in the other. Neither was much taller than his waist, but they were Aes Sedai. The fact knotted his tongue sufficiently that by the time he had worked up his nerve to ask... Chapter 21. Within the Stone. The mud of the outer city gave way to paved streets at the walls of Tyr, where the first thing Rand noticed was the absence of guards. Despite the lofty stone ramparts with their towers, the city was less defended than steading Shangtai, where he and every other human had been gently but firmly refused entrance at first light. Here, The archers' balconies on the towers were empty. The iron-strapped door of the squat gray guardhouse just inside the broad gates stood wide open, and a hard-faced woman in rough woolens, her sleeves shoved up her thin arms, sat there at a wooden tub, scrubbing clothes with a washboard. She appeared to have taken up residence. Two small grubby children, sucking their thumbs, stared wide-eyed past her at him and his companions. At their horses, at least. Tie-Dye Shah was a sight to stare at. A sleek black stallion with a massive chest, a horse that drew attention, yet he had chosen to ride the animal anyway. If the Forsaken could find it.
Chapter 24. Honey in the Tea. Egwene knew from the start that her strange captivity would be difficult, yet she believed that embracing pain as the Aiel did would be the easiest.
Chapter 20.
I think that's where we left off.
The
My
golden
book kind of
train.
restarted on me, so I'm not sure
The wind
exactly
had died away as the rain
where we
diminished,
stepped
but
off,
gray
but
clouds still hid
I
the
believe
sun.
that's it.
The fine drizzle was enough to dampen Rand's hair, however, and began soaking into his gold-embroidered black coat as he walked through the dead trollocs. Loghain had spun a shield of air so that raindrops bounced from it, or apparently slid down nothing to cascade. Chapter 18. News for the dragon.
That one sounds familiar.
Enough,
Hey,
Royal,
Fire, how you
Rand
doing?
said firmly, thumbing tobacco into his short-stemmed pipe from a goatskin pouch. It was Tyrant leaf, with a slightly
Let
oily
me
taste
share this
from
out
curing,
then. We'll
but
do
that
it
was all
then.
that was to be had. Thunder rolled overhead, slow and ponderous. You'll talk me hoarse with all these questions. They were seated at a long table in one of the larger rooms in Lord Algaren's manor house, the remains of the midday meal pushed down to one end. The servants were old for the most part, and slower moving than ever since Algaren left for the Black Tower. The rain pouring down outside seemed to be slackening, though strong gusts of wind still pelted the windows with raindrops hard enough to rattle the glass in the 6 yellow-painted casements. Many of those panes held bubbles. Some distorted what lay outside almost beyond recognition. The table and chairs were simply carved, no more elaborate than might be found in many farmhouses, and the yellow cornices beneath the high-beamed ceiling little more so. The two fireplaces, at either end of the room, were broad and tall, but of plain stone, the andirons and fire tools sturdy wrought iron and simple. Lord or no, Algaren was far from wealthy. Tucking the tobacco pouch into his pocket, Rand strolled to one of the fireplaces and used small brass tongs from the mantel to lift a burning sliver of oak for lighting his pipe. He hoped no one thought that strange. He avoided channeling any more than absolutely necessary, especially if anyone else was present. The dizziness that hit him when he did was difficult to conceal. But no one had mentioned it so far. A gust of wind brought a squeaking as though tree branches had scraped across the window panes. Imagination. The nearest trees were beyond the fields, more than half a mile away. Loyal had brought down a vine-carved chair from the Ogier rooms that put his knees level with the tabletop, so he had to lean forward sharply to write in his leather-bound notebook. The volume was small for him, little enough to fit neatly into one of his capacious coat pockets, but still as large as most human books Rand had seen. Fine hair decorated Loyal's upper lip, and a patch beneath his chin. He was attempting a beard and mustaches, though with only a few weeks' growth, it did not seem a very successful attempt so far.
But you've told me almost nothing really useful,
The Ogier rumbled, a drum booming its disappointment. His tufted ears drooped. Even so, he began wiping the steel nib of his polished wooden pen. Fatter than Rand's thumb, and long enough to seem slender, it fitted Loyal's thick fingers perfectly.
You never mention heroics, except by somebody else. You make it all sound so every day. To hear you tell it, the fall of Ilium was as exciting as watching a weaver repair her loom. And cleansing the true source, you and Nynaeve linked, then you sat and channeled while everybody else was off fighting Forsaken. Even Nynaeve told me more than that, and she claims to remember almost nothing.
Nynaeve, wearing all of her jeweled tirangrial and her strange bracelet and rings angrial, shifted in her chair in front of the other fireplace then went back to watching Olivia. Every so often she glanced toward the windows and tugged at her thick braid, but for the most part she focused on the yellow-haired Shongchan woman. Standing beside the doorway like a guard, Olivia gave a small, brief smile of amusement. The former Damani knew Nynaeve's display was meant for her. The intensity never left her hawkish blue eyes, though. It seldom had, ever since her collar had been removed in Camelin. The two maidens squatting on their heels near her playing cat's cradle, Harlan of the Iron Mountain Tagat and Delilah of the Jara Charin, were making their own display. Shufa wrapped around their heads and black veils hanging down their chests. Each had 3 or 4 spears stuck through the harness, holding her bow case on her back and a bullhide buckler lying on the floor. There were 50 maidens in the manor house, several of them Shido, and they all went about ready to dance the spears in a heartbeat. Perhaps with him. They seemed torn between delight at providing a guard for him again and displeasure over how long he had avoided them. As for himself, he could not look at any of them without the litany of women who had died for him, women he had killed, starting up in his head. Moraine Damatret. Her above all. Her name was written inside his skull in fire. Leah of the Corsada Charin, Sandara of the Iron Mountain Tardat, Lamella of the Smokewater Miagoma, Andalin of the Red Salt Goshin, Desara of the Musara Rain. So many names. Sometimes he woke in the middle of the night muttering that list, with Min holding him and murmuring to him as if soothing a child. He always told her he was all right and wanted to go back to sleep. And after he closed his eyes, he did not sleep until the list had been completed. Sometimes Luz Theron chatted it with him. Min looked up from the volume she had open on the table, one of Harriet Fell's books. She devoured those, and used the note he had sent Rand before his murder, the one where he said she was a distraction because she was so pretty, as a bookmark. Her short blue coat, embroidered with white flowers on the sleeves and lapels, was cut to fit snugly over her bosom, where her creamy silk blouse showed a touch of cleavage, and her big dark eyes, framed by dark ringlets to her shoulders, held a pleased light. He could feel her pleasure through the bond. She liked him looking at her. Without a doubt, the bond told her how much he liked looking. Oddly enough, it said she liked looking at him, too. Pretty? He hummed, thumbing his earlobe. She was beautiful, and tied to him tighter than ever. She and Elaine and Avienda. How was he to keep them safe now? He forced himself to smile back at her around his pipe stem, unsure how well the deception was working. A touch of irritation had entered the bond from her end, though why she should become irritable whenever she thought he was worrying about her was beyond him. Right, she wanted to protect him. Rand isn't very talkative, Loyal, she said, no longer smiling. Her low, almost musical voice held no anger, but the bond told another story. In fact, sometimes he's about as talkative as a mussel. The look she directed at Rand made him sigh. It seemed there would be a great deal of talking once they were alone together. I can't tell you much myself, but I'm sure Cat Swain and Baron will tell you anything you want to know. Others will too. Ask them if you want more than yes and no and 2 words besides. Stout little Baron, knitting in a chair beside Nynaeve, appeared startled to hear her name mentioned. She blinked vaguely, as though wondering why it had been. Cadswain, at the far end of the table with her sewing basket open beside her, only took her attention away from her embroidery hoop long enough to glance at Loyal. Golden ornaments swayed, dangling from the iron-gray bun atop her head. It was only that, a glance, not a frown, yet Loyal's ears twitched. Aes Sedai always impressed him, and Cadswain more than any other.
Oh, I will, Min, I will,
he said.
But Rand is central to my book.
With no sand jar at hand, he began blowing gently on the page of his notebook to dry the ink. But Loyal being loyal, he still talked between puffs.
You never give enough detail, Rand. You make me drag everything out of you. Why, you never even mentioned being imprisoned in Farmadding until Min did. Never mentioned it. What did the Council of Nine say when they offered you the Laurel Crown? And when you renamed it? I can't think they liked that. What was the coronation like? Was there feasting, a festival, parades? How many Forsaken came against you at Shadalogeth? Which ones? What did it look like at the end? What did it feel like? My book won't be very good without the details. I hope Matt and Perrin give me better answers.
He frowned, long eyebrows raising his cheeks.
I hope they're all right.
Colors spun in Rand's head. Twin rainbows swirled in water. He knew how to suppress them now, but this time he did not try. One resolved into a brief image of Matt riding through forest at the head of a line of mounted folk.
Oh yeah, we gotta do a
He seemed to
dab,
be
don't we?
arguing with a small dark woman who rode beside him, taking his hat off and peering into it, then cramming it back onto his head. That lasted only moments, then was replaced by Perrin, sitting over wine cups in a common room or tavern with a man and a woman who wore identical red coats ornately trimmed with blue and yellow. Odd garments. Perrin looked grim as death, his companions wary of him. "They're well," he said, calmly ignoring a piercing look from Cadswain. She did not know everything, and he intended to keep it that way. Calm on the surface, content, blowing smoke rings. Inside was another matter. Where are they? He thought angrily, pushing down another appearance of the colors. That was as easy as breathing now. I need them, and they're off for a day at the Anseline Gardens. Abruptly, another image was floating in his head, a man's face, and his breath caught. For the first time, it came without any dizziness. For the first time, he could see it clearly in the moments before it vanished. A blue-eyed man with a square chin, perhaps a few years older than himself. Or rather, he saw it clearly for the first time in a long while. It was the face of the stranger who had saved his life in Shadalogeth when he fought Samael. Worse.
He was aware of me,
Luce Theron said. He sounded sane for a change. Sometimes he did, but the madness always returned eventually.
How can a face appearing in my mind be aware of me?
If you don't know, how do you expect me to? Rand thought. I was aware of him as well. It had been a strange sensation, as if he were touching the other man somehow, only not physically. A residue hung on. It seemed he only had to move a hair's breadth in any direction to touch him again. I think he saw my face too. Talking to a voice in his head no longer seemed peculiar. In truth, it had not for quite a long time. And now? Now he could see Matt and Perrin by thinking of them or hearing their names, and he had this other face coming to him unbidden. More than a face, apparently. What was holding conversations inside his own skull alongside that? But the man had been aware and Rand of him. When the flames of balefire touched in Shadalogeth, it must have created some sort of link between us. I can't think of any other explanation. That was the only time we ever met. He was using their so-called
I'll be
true
back.
power.
Gotta go get my
It
other
had
one.
to be
This one's
that.
dead again.
I felt nothing, saw nothing except his stream of balefire. Having bits of knowledge seem his when he knew they came from Luce Theron no longer seemed odd either. He could remember the Anseline Gardens, destroyed in the War of the Shadow, as well as he did his father's farm. Knowledge drifted the other way, too. Luce Theron sometimes spoke of Emmons Field as if he had grown up there. Does that make any sense to you?
Oh, light, why do I have this voice in my head?
Luce Theron moaned.
Why can I not die? Oh, Ilyena, my precious Ilyena, I want to join you.
He trailed off into weeping. He often did when he spoke of the wife he had murdered in his madness. It did not matter. Rand suppressed the sound of the man crying, pushed it down to a faint noise on the edge of hearing. He was certain that he was right. But who was the fellow? A dark friend for sure, but not one of the Forsaken. Bruce Theron knew their faces as well as he knew his own, and now Rand did too. A sudden thought made him grimace. How aware of him was the other man? De Viren could be found by their effect on the pattern, though only the Forsaken knew how. Bruce Theron certainly had never mentioned knowing. Their conversations were always brief, and the man seldom gave information willingly, and nothing had drifted across from him on the subject. At least Lanfear and Ishamael had known how, but no one had found him that way since they had died. Could this link be used in the same fashion? They could all be in danger, more danger than usual, as if the usual were not enough.
Are you well, Rand?
Loyal asked worriedly, screwing the leaf-engraved silver cap onto his ink jar. The glass of that was so thick it could have survived anything short of being hurled against stone, but Loyal handled it as though it were fragile. In his huge hands it looked fragile.
I thought the cheese tasted off, but you ate a good bit of it.
I'm fine, Rand said, but of course Nynaeve paid him no heed. She was out of her chair and gliding down the room in a flash, blue skirts swirling. Goosebumps popped out on his skin as she embraced Sayadaw and stretched to lay her hands on his head. An instant later, a chill rippled through him. The woman never asked. Sometimes she behaved as if she were still the wisdom in Emmons Field, and he would be heading back to the farm come morning. You're not ill, she said in tones of relief. Spoiled food was causing all sorts of sickness among the servants, some of it serious. People would have died except for the presence of Ashamon and Aes Sedai to give healing. Reluctant to cost their lord scarce money by throwing food out, despite all the admonitions Cadswain, Nynaeve, and the other Aes Sedai gave them, they fed themselves things that should have been tossed on the midden heap. A different tingling centered briefly around the double wound in his left side. That wound is no better, she said with a frown. She had tried healing it, succeeding no better than Flynn had. That did not sit well with her. Nynaeve took failure as a personal insult. How can you even stand up? You must be in agony. He ignores it, Min said flatly. Oh yes, there would be words. It hurts no worse standing than sitting, he told Nynaeve, gently taking her hands from his head. Simple truth. So was what Min had said. He could not afford to let pain make him a prisoner. One of the twin doors creaked open to admit a white-haired man in a worn yellow coat trimmed with red and blue that hung loosely on his bony frame. His bow was halting, a fault of his joints rather than disrespect. My Lord Dragon, he said in a voice nearly as creaky as the hinges. Lord Loghain has returned. Loghain did not wait on invitations, entering practically on the serving man's heels. A tall man with dark hair curling to his shoulders and dark for Gil'Danan, women likely thought him handsome. Yet there was a streak of darkness inside him as well. He wore his black coat with the sword and the dragon on the high collar, and the long-hilted sword on his hip. But he had made an addition, a round enameled pin on his shoulder, showing 3 golden crowns in a field of blue. Had the man adopted a sigil? The old man's hairy eyebrows shot up in surprise, and he looked to Rand as if inquiring whether he wanted Loghain removed. The news from Andor is fair enough, I suppose, Loghain said, tucking black gauntlets behind his sword belt. He offered Rand a minimal bow, the slightest bending of his back. Elaine still holds Caemlyn, and Aramilla still holds her siege. But Elaine has the advantage, since Aramilla can't even stop food getting in, much less reinforcements. No need to scowl. I kept out of the city. Blackcoats aren't exactly welcome there in any case. The Borderlanders are still in the same place. You were wise to stay clear of them, it seems. Rumor says there are 13 Aes Sedai with them. Rumor says they're looking for you. Has Bashir gotten back yet? Nynaeve gave him a scowl and moved away from Rand, holding her braid tightly. Aes Sedai bonding Ashamon was all very well in her book, but not the reverse. 13, and looking for him? He had stayed clear of the borderlanders because Elaine did not welcome his help. Interference, she called it, and he had begun to see that she had the right of it. The Lion Throne was hers to gain, not his to give. But perhaps it was as well that he had. The borderland rulers all had ties to the White Tower, and no doubt Elida was still eager to get her hands on him. Her and that mad proclamation about no one approaching him except through her. If she believed that would force him to come to her, she was a fool. Thank you. That will be all, Ethan. Lord Logain? He asked as the serving man bowed himself out with a last disgruntled glance at Logain. Rand thought the man would have tried had he told him to haul Logain out. The title is his by birth, Cat Swain said without looking up from her embroidery. She would know. She had helped capture him back when he was calling himself the Dragon Reborn. He and Taim both. Her hair ornaments bobbed as she nodded to herself. Pah! A minor lordling with a scrap of land in the mountains, most of it all but straight up and down. But King Johannan and the Crown High Council stripped him of his lands and title after he became a false dragon. Small spots of color appeared in Logain's cheeks, yet his voice was cool and composed. They could take my estate, but they could not take away who I am. Still seemingly intent on her embroidery needle, Cat Swain laughed softly. Baron's knitting needles had stopped. She was studying Logain, a plump sparrow, studying an insect. Olivia had shifted her intense gaze to the man, too. And Harlan and Delilah seemed to be just going through the motions of their game. Min appeared to be reading still, but each hand rested near the opposite cuff of her coat sleeves. She kept some of her knives hidden there. None of them trusted him. Rand frowned. The man could call himself whatever he wanted, so long as he did what he was supposed to. But Cat Swain prodded him, and anyone else in the black coat, nearly as much as she did Rand himself. He was unsure how far to trust Logain either, yet he had to work with the tools he had to hand. Is it done? With Logain here, Loyal was uncapping his ink jar again. More than half the Black Tower is in Arad-Daman and Ilium. I sent all the men with bonded Aes Sedai except those here, as you ordered. Logain walked to the table while he talked, found the blue-glazed pitcher that still held wine among the plates and scraps, and filled the green-glazed cup. There was very little silver in the house. You should have let me bring more men here. The numbers tilt too much to Aes Sedai for my liking. Rand grunted. Since part of that is your doing, you can live with it. Others will have to as well. Go on. Dobrain and Ruark will send a soldier with a message as soon as they find anyone in charge of more than a village. The Council of Merchants claim King Al-Salam still reigns, but they wouldn't or couldn't produce him or say where he is. They seem to be at one another's throats themselves. And Bandar Eben is more than half deserted and given over to the mob. Logain grimaced into his wine cup. Gangs of strong-arms provide what little order there is. They extort food and coins from the people they claim to protect and take whatever else they want. The boss, white-hot rage and in her throat. Ruark has said about putting an end to that, but it was already turning into a battle on the back. Logain finished. Strong arms won't hold out long against Aiel. If Dobrain can't find anyone in charge, then he will have to be for the time being. If Al-Salam was dead, as seemed likely, he would have to appoint a steward for the Lord Draken in Arad-Daman. But who? It would have to be someone the Damani would accept. The other man took a long swallow of wine. Taim wasn't pleased at me taking so many men out of the tower and not telling him where they were going. I thought he was going to rip up your order. He tried every trick to learn where you are. Oh, he burns to know that. His eyes are practically on fire. I wouldn't put it past him to have put me to the question and been fool enough to meet him without company. One thing pleased him, though, but I didn't take any of his cronies. That was plain on his face. He smiled, a dark smile, not amused. There are 41 of those now, by the way. He's given over a dozen men the dragon pin, in the past few days, and he has about 50 more in his special classes, most of them men recruited just lately. He's planning something, and I doubt you'll like it.
I told you to kill him when you had the chance.
Who's there and cackled in mad mirth. I told you, and now it's too late. It's too late. Rand angrily expelled a stream of blue-gray smoke. Give over, he said, meaning it for both Logain and Blue Theron. Taim built the Black Tower till it nearly matches the White Tower for numbers, and it grows every day. If he's a dark friend the way you claim, why would he do that? Logain met his stare levelly. Because he couldn't stop it. From what I've heard, even in the beginning, there were men who could travel who weren't his toad eaters, and he had no excuse to do all the recruiting himself. But he's made a tower of his own, hidden inside the Black Tower, and the men in it are loyal to him, not you. He amended the deserters list and sends his apologies for an honest mistake, but you can wager all you own it was no mistake. And how loyal was Logain? If one false dragon chafed at following the dragon reborn, why not another? He might think he had cause. He had been far more famous as a false dragon than Taim, more successful, gathering an army that swept out of Gildan and nearly reached Lugard on its way to Tyr. Half the known world had trembled at the name Logain. Yet Mazran Taim commanded the Black Tower, while Logain Ablar was only another Ashaman. Men still saw an aura of glory around him. Just how that glory was to be achieved was beyond their viewing, however.
Battery low. Battery 10%.
Branded into his palm. He must have been puffing away furiously without being aware of it. The trouble was, Taim and Logain were lesser problems. They had to wait. The tools at hand. He made an effort to keep his voice even. Taim took their names off the list. That's the important thing. If he's showing favor, when I have time. But the Shonchan have to come first. And maybe Tom and Gaiden, too. If, Logain growled, slamming his cup down on the table so hard that it broke. Wine spread across the tabletop and dripped over the edge. Scowling, he wiped his damp hand on his coat. Do you think I'm imagining things? His tone grew more heated by the word. Or making them up? Do you think this is jealousy, Althor? Is that what you think? You listen to me, Rand began, raising his voice against a peal of thunder. I told you I expected you and your friends in black coats to be civil to me, my friends, and my guests, Cad Swain said sternly. But I've decided that must be expanded to include each other. Her head was still bent over her embroidery hoop, but she spoke as if she were shaking a finger under their noses. At least when I am present. That means if you continue squabbling, I may have to spank both of you. Arlen and Anila began laughing so hard they got the string of their game in a snarl. Nynaeve laughed too, though she tried to hide it behind her hand. Right, even Min smiled. Logain bristled, jaw tightening, until Rand thought he should hear the man's teeth grating. He was trying hard not to bristle himself. Cad swinging her bloody rules. Her conditions for becoming his advisor. She pretended that he had asked for them, and every so often she added another to her list. The rules were not precisely onerous, though their existence was, but her way of presenting them was always like a poke with a sharp stick. He opened his mouth to tell her he was finished with her rules, and with her too, if need be. Taim very likely will have to wait on the last battle, whatever he's about, Baron said suddenly. Her knitting, a shapeless lump that might have been anything, sat in her lap. It will come soon. According to everything I've read on the subject, the signs are quite clear. Half the servants have recognized dead people in the halls, people they knew alive. It's happened often enough that they aren't frightened by it any longer. And a dozen men moving the cattle to spring pasture watched a considerable town melt into mist just a few miles to the north. Cad Swain had raised her head and was staring at the stout brown sister. Thank you for repeating what you told us yesterday, Varen, she said dryly. Varen blinked, then took up her knitting again, frowning at it as though she too were unsure what it was going to be. Min caught Rand's eyes, shaking her head slowly, and he sighed. The bond held irritation and wariness, the last deliberate warning to him, he suspected. At times, she seemed to be able to read his mind. Well, if he needed Cadswain, and Min said he did, then he needed her. He just wished he knew what she was supposed to teach him aside from how to grind his teeth. Advise me, Cadswain. What do you think of my plan? At last the boy asks, she murmured, setting her embroidery down beside her sewing basket. All his schemes in motion, some I've not been made privy to, and now he asks. Very well. Your peace with the Shonchan will be unpopular. A truce, he broke in, and a truce with the Dragon Reborn will last only as long as the Dragon Reborn. When I die, everyone will be free to go to war with the Shonchan again if they wish. Min slammed her book shut and folded her arms beneath her breasts. Don't you talk that way, she said, red-faced with anger. The bond also carried fear. The prophecies, Min, he said sadly. Not sad for himself, but for her. He wanted to protect her and Elaine and Avienda, but he would hurt them in the end. I said you don't talk that way. The prophecies don't say you have to die. I'm not going to let you die, Randolph Thor. Elaine and Avienda and I won't let you. She glared at Olivia, who her viewing had said would help Rand die, and her hands slid down her arms toward her cuffs. Behave, Min, he said. Her hands shot away from her cuffs, but she set her jaw, and the bond suddenly was flooded with stubbornness. Like, was he going to have to worry about Min trying to kill Olivia? Not that she was likely to succeed, as well try throwing a knife to an Aes Sedai, as at the Shonchan woman, but she might get herself injured. He was not sure Olivia knew any weaves but those for weapons. Unpopular, as I say, Cadswain said firmly, raising her voice. She favored Min with a brief frown before turning her attention back to Rand. Her face was smooth, composed, an Aes Sedai's face. Her dark eyes were hard, like polished black stones. Especially in Terabon, Amadisia, and Altara, but also elsewhere. If you agree to allow the Shonchan to keep what they've already taken, what lands will you give away next? That is how most rulers will see matters. Rand dropped back into his chair, stretching his legs in front of him and crossing his ankles. It doesn't matter how unpopular it is. I went through that door for Tirangrial and Tyr, Cadswain. You know about that? Golden ornaments bobbled as she nodded impatiently. One of my questions for the Aelfin was, how can I win the last battle? A dangerous question to pose, she said quietly, touching on the shadow as it does. Supposedly, the results can be quite unpleasant. What was the answer? The north and the east must be as one. The west and the south must be as one. The two must be as one. He blew a smoke ring, put another in the middle of it as it expanded. That was not the whole of it. He had asked how to win and survive. The last part of his answer had been, to live, you must die. Not something he was going to bring up in front of Min anytime soon. In front of anyone except Olivia, for that matter. Now he just had to figure out how to live by dying. At first I thought it meant I had to conquer everywhere, but that wasn't what they said. What if it means the Shonchan hold the west and south, as you could say they already do, and there's an alliance to fight the last battle, the Shonchan with everybody else? It's possible, she allowed, but if you're going to make this truce, why are you moving what seems to be a considerable army to Ardaman and reinforcing what is already in Ilion? Because Tarmangaiden is coming, Cadswain, and I can't fight the Shadow and the Shonchan at the same time. I'll have a truce or I'll crush them, whatever the cost. The prophecies say I have to bind the 9 moons to me. I only understood what that meant a few days ago. As soon as Bashir returns, I'll know when and where I'm to meet the Daughter of the Nine Moons. The only question now is how do I find her, and she'll have to answer that. He spoke matter-of-factly, now and then blowing a smoke ring for punctuation. Reactions varied. Boyle just wrote very fast, trying to capture every word, while Harlan and Delilah went on with their game. If the spears had to be danced, they were ready. Olivia nodded fiercely, doubtless hoping it would come to crushing those who had kept her wearing Adon for 500 years. Logain found another wine cup and filled it with the last of what was in the pitcher, but he merely held the cup rather than drinking, his expression unreadable. Now it was Rand whom Baron studied intently, but then she had always been curious about him. But why in the life would Nim feel bone-deep sadness? And Catswing? Stone cracks from a hard enough blow, she said, her face an Aes Sedai mask of calm. Steel shatters. The oak fights the wind and breaks. The willow bends where it must and survives. A willow won't win Tarman Gaiden, he told her. The door creaked open again, and Ethan tottered in. My lord Dragon, 3 Ogier have arrived. They were most pleased to learn that Master Loyal is here. One of them is his mother.
My mother?
Loyal squeaked, and even that sounded like a hollow wind gusting in caverns. He leaped up so fast that his chair fell over backwards, wringing his hands, ears wilting. His head swung from side to side as if he were hunting for a way out besides the door.
What am I going to do, Rand? The other two must be Elder Hammond and Aerith. What am I going to do?
Mistress Covrell said she was most anxious to speak with you, Master Loyal, Ethan said in that creaky voice. Most anxious. They are all damp from the rain, but she said they will wait for you in the Ogier sitting room upstairs.
What am I going to do, Rand?
You said you want to marry Aerith, Rand said as gently as he could. Gentleness was difficult except with men.
But my book. My notes aren't complete, and I'll never find out what happens next. Aerith will take me back to studying Sofu with her.
Fah! Catswing picked up her embroidery again and began working the needle delicately. She was making the ancient symbol of Aes Sedai. The dragon's fang and the flame of Tarvalin melted into a disc, black and white separated by a sinuous line. Go to your mother, Loyal. If she's Covril, daughter of Ella, daughter of Sun, you don't want to keep her waiting. As I expect you know. Loyal seemed to take Catswain's words as a command. He began wiping his pen nib again, capping his ink jar. But he did everything very slowly, with his ears drooping. Every so often he moaned sadly, half under his breath. Well, Baron said, holding up her knitting for inspection. I believe I've done all that I can here. I think I'll go find Thomas. The rain makes his knee ache, though he denies it even to me. She glanced at the window. It does seem to be slowing. And I think I'll go find Lan, Nynaeve said, gathering her skirts. The company is better where he is. That with a sharp tug on her braid and a glare divided between Olivia and Logain. The wind tells me a storm is coming, Rand. And you know I don't mean rain. The last battle? Rand asked. How soon? When it came to weather, listening to the wind could sometimes tell her when the rains would come to the hour. It may be, and I don't know. Just remember, a storm is coming. A terrible storm. Overhead, thunder rolled. Chapter 19. Vows.
Had to clean that up a little bit.
Uneasy,
Even
Loyal
it out.
watched Nynaeve glide off down the lamplit corridor in one direction and Baron in the other. Neither was much taller than his waist. The fact knotted his tongue sufficiently that by the time he had worked up his nerve to ask one of them to accompany him, both were out of sight around sharp corners. The manor house was a rambling place, added to over many years with no real overall plan that he could discern, and hallways frequently met at odd angles. He really wished he had an Aes Sedai for company when he faced his mother. Even Cadswain, although she made him very nervous with how she was always pinching at Rand. Sooner or later, Rand was going to explode. He was not the same man Royal first met in Camelot, or even the man he had left in Kyrian. The mood around Rand was dark and stony now, a dense patch of lion's claw and treacherous ground underfoot. The whole house felt that way with Rand in it. A lean, gray-haired serving woman carrying a basket of folded towels gave a start, then shook her head and muttered something under her breath before offering him a brief curtsy and walking on. She made a small sidestep as though she was moving around something, or someone. He stared at the spot and scratched behind his ear. Maybe he could only see Ogier dead. Not that he really wanted to. It was sad enough just knowing that human dead could no longer rest. Having the same confirmed for Ogier would be enough to break his heart. Most likely they would appear only inside Steading in any case. He would very much like to see a town vanish, though. Not a real town, but a town that was as dead as those spirits that humans burned to see. You might be able to walk its streets before it melted and see what people were like before the War of the 100 Years, or even the Trolloc Wars. So Varen said, and she seemed to know a very great deal about it. That would certainly be worth a mention in his book. It was going to be a fine book. Scratching his beard with 2 fingers, the thing itched. He sighed. It would have been a fine book. Standing there in the corridor was only putting off the inevitable. Put off clearing the brush, and you always find chokevine in it, so the old saying went. Only he felt as though the chokevine was tied around him instead of a tree. Breathing hard, he followed the serving woman all the way to the wide stairs that led up to the Ogier rooms. The staircase had 2 sturdy banisters, shoulder high on the gray-haired woman, and stout enough to give a decent handhold. He was often afraid just to brush against stair rails made for humans for fear he might break them. One ran down the middle, with the steps along the wood-paneled hall pitched for human feet, those on the outside for Ogier. The woman was old, as humans counted years, yet she climbed more quickly than he and was scurrying down the corridor by the time he reached the top. Doubtless she was taking the towels to his mother's room and to Elder Hammond's and Aaron's. Surely he would prefer to get dry before talking. He would suggest that. It would gain him time to think. His thoughts seemed as sluggish as his feet, and his feet felt like millstones. There were 6 bedrooms built for Ogier along the corridor, which itself was properly scaled for them. His upstretched hands would have come a pace short of touching the ceiling beams, along with a storeroom, a bathing room with a large copper tub, and the sitting room. This was the oldest part of the house, dating back nearly 500 years. A lifetime for a very old Ogier, but many lifetimes for humans. They lived such brief lives, except for Aes Sedai. That had to be why they flitted about like hummingbirds. But even Aes Sedai could be nearly as precipitous as the rest. That was a puzzlement. The sitting room door was carved with a great tree. Not Ogier work, yet finely detailed and instantly recognizable. He stopped, tugging his coat straight, combing his hair with his fingers, wishing he had time to black his boots. There was an ink stain on his cuff. No time to do anything about that either. Cadswain was right. His mother was not a woman to be kept waiting. Strange that Cadswain knew of her. Perhaps knew her by the way she had spoken. Gavril, daughter of Ella, daughter of Sun, was a famous speaker, but he had not realized she was known outside. Right, he was all but panting with anxiety. Trying to control his breathing, he went in. You can hear the hinges creaked. The servants had been aghast when he asked after some oil to put on them. That was their task. He was a guest. But they still had not gotten around to it themselves. The high-ceilinged room was quite spacious, with dark polished wallpapers, and vine-carved chairs, and small vine-carved tables, and wrought-iron stand lamps of a proper size, their mirror frames dancing above his head. Except for a shelf of books, all old enough that the leather bindings were flaking, and all of which he had read before, only a small bowl of sungwood was Ogier made. A nice piece. He wished he knew who had sung it. but it was aged enough that singing to it had failed to raise so much as an echo. Yet everything had been made by someone who at least had been to a steading. The pieces would have looked at home in any dwelling. Of course, the room looked nothing like a room in a steading, but Lord Elgaren's ancestor had made an effort to have his visitors feel comfortable. His mother was standing in front of one of the brick fireplaces, a strong-faced woman, with her vine-embroidered skirts spread to let the flames dry them. He heaved a sigh of relief at seeing she was not as wet as he had expected, although it put paid to suggesting that they take the time to get dry. Their rain cloaks must have developed leaks after a time, as the aniseed oil wore off. Maybe her temper would not be as bad as he feared either. White-haired Elder Hammond, his flaring coat dark with damp in several large patches, was examining one of the axes from the wall, shaking his head over it. Its haft was as long as he was tall. Made during the Trolloc Wars, or even before, there were a pair of those, the long axe heads inlaid with gold and silver, and a pair of ornate pointed pruning knives, with long shafts as well. Of course, pruning knives, sharp on one side and saw-toothed on the other, always had long handles, but the inlays and long red tassels indicated that these had been made for weapons too. Not the most felicitous choices for hanging in a room meant for reading or conversation, or the quiet contemplation of stillness. But Loyal's eyes swept past his mother and Elder Hammond to the other fireplace, where Aerith was drying her own skirts, short and almost fragile appearing. Her mouth was straight, her nose short and well-rounded, her eyes the exact color of a silver bell's ripe seed pod. In short, she was beautiful. And her ears, sticking up through the glossy black hair that hung down her back, curving and plump, tipped with fine tufts that looked as soft as dandelion down, they were the most gorgeous ears he had ever seen. Not that he would be crude enough to say so. She smiled at him, a very mysterious smile, and his own ears quivered with embarrassment. Surely she could not know what he had been thinking. Would she? Rand said women could sometimes, but that was human women.
So, here you are,
His mother said, clenching her fists on her hips. There were no smiles from her. Her brows were drawn down, her jaw set. If this was her better temper, she might as well have been drenched.
I must say you've led me a merry chase, but I have you in hand now, and I do not mean to let you run. What is that on your lip? And your chin? Well, you can shave those right off again. Don't you grimace at me, son Loyal.
Fingering the growth on his upper lip uneasily, he tried to smooth his face. When your mother named you son, she was in no mood to trifle with. But it was hard. He wanted his beard and mustaches. Some might think it pretentious, as young as he was, but just the same.
A merry chase indeed,
Elder Hammond said dryly, hanging the axe back on its hooks. He had long white mustaches that fell past his chin, and a long narrow beard that hung to his chest. True, he was well above 300 years old, but it still seemed unfair.
A very merry chase. First we walked to Kyrian, having heard you were there, only you had gone. After a stop at Stedding Sofu, we walked to Cayman, where young Althor informed us you were in the Two Rivers and took us there. But you were gone again. To Cayman, it seemed.
His eyebrows rose almost to his hairline.
I began to think we were playing Ring in the Dell.
The people in Emmons Field told us how heroic you were,
Aerith said, her high voice like music. Clutching her skirts with both hands, ears fluttering with excitement, she seemed about to bounce up and down.
They told us all about you fighting Trollocs and Murdroll, and going out among them by yourself to seal the Manetheren Waygate so no more could come.
I wasn't by myself,
Loyal protested, waving his hands. He thought his ears might fly from his head. They were twitching so with embarrassment.
Gaul was with me. We did it together. I'd never have reached the Waygate without Gaul.
She wrinkled her delicate nose at him, dismissing Gaul's participation. His mother sniffed. Her ears were rigid with distaste.
Foolishness. Fighting in battles, putting yourself in danger, gambling, all of it. Pure foolishness, and there will be no more of it.
Elder Hammond harumphed, ears twitching irritably, and folded his hands behind his back. He disliked being interrupted.
So we returned to Camelin to find you gone, and then to Kyrian once more to find you gone yet again. And you put yourself in danger again in Kyrian,
Loyal's mother broke in, shaking a finger at him.
Have you no sense at all?
The Aiel said you were very brave at Dumai's wells,
Aerith murmured, looking at him through her long eyelashes. He swallowed hard. Her gaze made his throat feel tight. He knew he should look away, but how could he be demure when she was looking at him?
In Kyrian, your mother decided she couldn't stay away from the Great Stump any longer, though why I cannot say, since they aren't likely to reach any sort of decision for another year or two, so we set out to return to Sitting Shanghai in the hope we could find you later.
Elder Hammond said all of that very fast, glaring at the two women as if he thought they might break in on him again. His beard and mustaches seemed to bristle. Loyal's mother gave another squirt, sharper.
I expect to bring a decision very quickly, in a month or two, or I'd never have given over the search for Loyal, even temporarily. Now that I've found him, we can finish matters and be on our way without any more delay.
She took in Elder Hammond, who was frowning, his ears slanted back, and amended her tone. He was an elder, after all.
Forgive me, Elder Hammond. I meant to say, if it pleases you, will you perform the ceremony?
I believe that it does please me, Cothrill,
he said mildly, much too mildly. When Loyal heard that tone from his teacher, with ears back, he had always known that he had put a foot very badly wrong. Elder Hammond had been known to throw a piece of chalk at a pupil when he used that tone.
Since I abandoned my students, not to mention speaking to the Great Stump to follow you on this wild chase for that very reason, I believe it does please me indeed. Aerith, you are very young. She's past 80, old enough to marry,
Loyal's mother said sharply, folding her arms across her chest. Her ears twitched with impatience.
Her mother and I reached agreement. You yourself witnessed us signing the betrothal and Loyal's dowry.
Elder Hammond's ears tilted back a little further, and his shoulders hunched as if he was gripping his hands together very hard behind his back. His eyes never left Aerith.
I know you want to marry, Loyal, but are you sure you are ready? Taking a husband is a grave responsibility.
Loyal wished someone would ask him that question, but that was not the way. His mother and Aerith had reached their agreement, and only Aerith could stop it now. If she wanted to. Did he want her to? He could not stop thinking of his book. He could not stop thinking of Aerith. She certainly looked grave.
My weaving sells well, and I am ready to buy another loom and take an apprentice. But that may not be what you mean. I am ready to tend a husband.
Suddenly she grinned, a lovely grin that divided her face in two.
Especially one with such beautiful long eyebrows.
Loyal's ears quivered, and so did Elder Hammond's, if not so much. Women were very free in their talk among themselves, so he had heard, but usually they tried not to embarrass men with it. Usually. His mother's ears actually trembled with amusement. The older man cleared his throat.
This is serious, Aerith. Calm down. If you are sure, take his hands.
Without hesitation, she came to stand in front of Loyal, smiling up at him as she took his hands in hers. Her small hands felt very warm. His felt numb and cold. He swallowed. It really was going to happen.
Aerith, daughter of Iva, daughter of Aelar,
Elder Hammond said, holding one hand palm down over each of their heads.
will you take Loyal, son of Erent, son of Helen, as husband, and vow under the light and by the tree to treasure, esteem, and love him so long as he lives, to care for him and tend him, and to guide his feet on the path they should follow?
Under the light and by the tree, I so vow.
Aerith's voice was firm and clear, and her smile seemed to have grown wider than her face.
Loyal, son of Aaron, son of Helen, will you accept Aerith, daughter of Iva, daughter of Aelar, as wife, and vow under the light and by the tree to as long as she lives, to care for her, and to heed her guidance?
Loyal took a deep breath. His ears trembled. He wanted to marry her, he did, just not yet.
Under the light and by the tree I so vow,
He said hoarsely.
Then under the light and by the tree I declare you wed. May the blessings of the light and the tree be upon you always.
Loyal looked down at his wife. His wife. She raised a hand and stroked slender fingers along his mustaches. The beginnings of mustaches, anyway.
You are very handsome, and I think mustaches would be beautiful on you. A beard, too.
Nonsense,
His mother said. Surprisingly, she was dabbing at her eyes with a small lace handkerchief. She was never emotional.
He's much too young for that sort of thing.
For a moment, he thought Aerith's ears began to slant back. That had to be his imagination. He had had a number of long talks with her. She was a wonderful conversationalist. Though come to think, for the most part, she listened. But what little she did say was always very cogent. And he was sure she possessed no sort of temper at all. He had no time to think on it in any event. Resting her hands on his arms, she rose on tiptoes, and he bent to rub his nose against hers. In truth, they nosed for longer than they should have, with Elder Hammond and his mother present, but others faded from his thoughts as he inhaled his wife's scent, and she his. And the feel of her nose on his. Pure bliss. He cupped the back of her head, and barely had the presence of mind not to finger her ear. She tugged a tuft on one of his. After a while, a very long while it seemed, voices intruded.
It is still raining, Coswell. You cannot seriously be suggesting we set out again when we have a sound roof over our heads and proper beds to sleep in for a change. No, I say, no. I will not sleep on the ground tonight, or in a barn, or worst of all, in a house where my feet and knees hang over the end of the largest bed available. There have been times I've seriously thought of refusing hospitality, and to the pit with rudeness. If you insist,
His mother said grudgingly.
but I want an early start come morning. I refuse to waste an hour more than I must. The book of translation must be opened as soon as possible.
Loyal jerked erect, aghast.
That's what the great stump is discussing? They can't do that. Not now. We must leave this world eventually, so we can come to it when the wheel turns,
His mother said, striding to the nearest fireplace to spread her skirts again.
That is written. Now is exactly the right time, and the sooner the better. Is that what you think, Elder Hammond?
Loyal asked worriedly.
No, my boy, not at all. Before we left, I gave a speech of 3 hours that I think swayed a few minds in the right direction.
Elder Hammond picked up a tall yellow pitcher and filled a blue cup, but rather than drink, he frowned into the tea.
Your mother has swayed more, I fear. She may even get her decision in months, as she says.
Aerith filled a cup for his mother, then 2 more, bringing one to him. His ears quivered with embarrassment yet again. He should have done that. He had a great deal to learn about being a husband, but he knew that much.
I wish I could address the stump,
He said bitterly.
You sound eager, husband.
Husband? That meant Aerith was very serious. It was almost as bad as being called son loyal.
What would you say to the stump?
I won't have him embarrassed, Aerith,
His mother said before he could open his mouth.
Loyal writes well, and Elder Hammond says he may have the makings of a scholar about him, but he gets tongue-tied before even 100. Besides, he's only a boy.
Elder Hammond had said that. Loyal wondered when his ears would stop quivering.
Any married man may address the stump,
Aerith said firmly. There was no doubt this time. Her ears definitely slanted back.
Will you allow me to tend my own husband, Mother Cudgel?
His mother's mouth moved, but no sound came out, and her eyebrows were halfway up her forehead. He did not think he had ever seen her so taken aback, though she must have expected this. A wife always took precedence with her husband over his mother.
Well, husband, what would you say?
He was not eager, he was desperate. He took a long swallow of the spice-scented tea, but his mouth felt just as dry afterward. His mother was right. The more people were listening, the more he tended to forget what he intended to say and go off on tangents. In truth, he had to admit that sometimes he rambled a bit with only a few listeners. Just a bit, now and then. He knew the forms. A child of 50 knew the forms. Yet he could not make the words come. The few listening to him now were not just
I'll be right back.
His mother was a famous speaker, Elder Hammond a noted one, not to mention being an elder. And there was Aerith. A man wanted to stand well in his wife's eyes. Turning his back on them, he strode to the nearest window and stood rolling the teacup between his palms. The window was sized decently, though the panes set in the carved casement were no larger than those in the rooms below. The rain had dwindled to a drizzle falling from a gray sky, and despite bubbles in the glass, he could make out the trees beyond the fields, pine and sour gum, and the occasional oak, all full of new growth. Elgaren's people tended their forest well, clearing out the deadfall to rob wildfire of its tinder. Fire had to be used carefully. The words came more easily now that he could not see the others watching him. Should he begin with the longing? Could they dare leave if they would begin dying in a handful of years? No. That question would have been addressed first thing and suitable answers found, else the stump would have finished inside a year. Light, if he did not address the stump. For a moment he saw the crowds standing all around him, hundreds and hundreds of men and women waiting to hear his words, perhaps several thousand. His tongue tried to cling to the roof of his mouth. He blinked, and there was only the bubbled glass before him and the trees. He had to do it. He was not particularly brave, whatever Aerith thought, but he had learned about bravery watching humans, watching them hang on no matter how strong the winds grew, fight when they had no hope, fight and win because they fought with desperate courage. Suddenly, he knew what to say.
In the War of the Shadow, we did not huddle in our steading, hoping no Trollocs and Murdlaw would be driven to enter. We did not open the book of translation and flee. We marched alongside the humans and fought the Shadow. In the Trolloc Wars, we neither hid in the steading nor opened the book of translation. We marched with the humans and fought the Shadow. In the darkest years, when hope seemed gone, we fought the Shadow. And by the War of the 100 Years, we had learned not to get ourselves tangled in human affairs,
his mother put in. That was allowed. Speaking could turn into a debate unless the pure beauty of your words held the listeners. She had once spoken from sunrise to sunset in favor of a very unpopular position without a single interruption, and the next day no one had risen to speak against her. He could not form beautiful sentences. He could only say what he believed. He did not turn from the window.
The War of the 100 Years was a human affair. and none of ours. The shadow is our affair. When it is the shadow that must be fought, our axes have always grown long handles. Perhaps in a year, or 5 or 10, we will open the book of translation. But if we do it now, we cannot run away with any real hope of safety. Tarmangaiden is coming, and on that hangs the fate not only of this world, but of any world we might flee to. When fire threatens the trees, we do not run away and hope that the flames will not follow us. We fight. Now the shadow is coming like wildfire, and we dare not run from it.
Something was moving among the trees, all along the line he could see. A herd of cattle? A very big herd, if so.
That isn't bad,
His mother said.
much too plain-spoken to carry any weight at a steading stump, much less the great stump, of course, but not bad. Go on. Frolics,
He breathed. That was what it was. Thousands of trollocs in black spiked mail spilling out of the trees at a run with scythe-curved swords raised, shaking their spiked spears, some carrying torches. Trollocs as far as he could see to left and right. Not thousands, tens of thousands. Aerith pushed in beside him at the window and gasped.
so many. Are we going to die, Loyal?
She did not sound afraid. She sounded excited.
Not if I can warn Rand and the others.
He was already starting for the door. Only Aes Sedai and Ashiman could save them now.
Here, my boy, I think we may need these.
He turned just in time to catch the long-handled axe that Elder Hammond tossed him. The other man's ears were back all the way, laid flat against his skull. Loyal realized his own were, too.
Here, Aerith,
His mother said calmly, lifting down one of the pruning knives.
if they get inside, we will try to hold them at the stairs. You are my hero, husband,
Aerith said as she took the knife's shaft in hand.
but if you get yourself killed, I will be very angry with you.
She sounded as if she meant it. And then he and Elder Hammond were running down the corridor together, pounding down the stairs, bellowing at the tops of their lungs a warning and a battle cry that had not been heard in over 2,000 years.
Trollocs coming! Up axes and clear the field! Trollocs coming!
So I will take care of Tyr, Logain, while you... Abruptly, Rand wrinkled his nose. It was not that he actually smelled a rotting midnight suddenly, but he felt as if he did, and the feeling was getting stronger.
Shadow spawn,
Cadswain said quietly, putting down her embroidery and rising. His skin tingled as she embraced the source. Or maybe it was Olivia, walking briskly toward the windows after the Green Sister. Min stood, drawing a pair of throwing knives from her coat sleeves. At the same instant, through the thick walls, he faintly heard Ogier shouting. There was no mistaking those deep, drum-like voices.
Trollocs coming! Up axes! Field!
With an oath, he leaped to his feet and ran to a window. Trollocs in thousands came running through the light rain across the newly planted fields. Trollocs as tall as Ogier and taller. Trollocs with ram's horns and goat's horns, wolves' snouts, boars' snouts. Trollocs with eagles' beaks and crests of feathers. Muddy earth splashing beneath boots and hooves and paws. Silent as death they ran. Black-clad Murdral galloped behind them, cloaks hanging as if they were standing still. He could see 30 or 40. How many more on other sides of the house? Others had heard the Ogier's cries.
Hey,
Or maybe it
Christopher,
just
how
looked
you
out a
doing,
window.
bro?
Lightning
Hope you're
began to
doing
fall
well.
among the charging Trollocs. Silver bolts that struck with a roar and hurled huge bodies in every direction. In other places, the ground erupted in flames, fountaining dirt and parts of Trollocs, heads, arms, legs wheeling through the air. Balls of fire struck them and exploded, each killing dozens. But on they ran as fast as horses, if not faster. Rand could not see the leaves that drew some of those lightning bolts. Now that they were discovered, the Trollocs began to shout, a wordless roar of rage. In the thatch-roofed outbuildings, large, sturdy barns and stables, some of Bashir's Saldaeans stuck their heads out and quickly pulled them back again, drawing the doors shut behind them. You told your Aes Sedai calmly. Do I look fool enough not to? Loghain snarled. At another window, he already held Saladin, nearly as much as Rand could draw. He was weaving as fast as he could. Do you intend to help or just watch, my Lord Dragon? There was entirely too much sarcasm in that, but now was not the time to bring it up. Drawing a deep breath, Rand gripped the casement on either side of the window against the dizziness that would come. The dragon's gold-ringed heads on the backs of his hands seemed to writhe, and reached out to seize the power. His head spun as Saladin flooded into him, icy flames and crumbling mountains, a chaos trying to pull him under, but blessedly clean. He still felt the wonder of that. His head spun and his stomach wanted to empty itself, the odd illness that should have gone with the taint. Yet that was not why he clung to the casement even harder. The one power filled him, but in that moment of dizziness, Lews Therin had seized it away from him. Numb with horror, he stared at the Trollocs and Myrddraal racing toward the outbuildings. With the power in him, he could make out the pins fastened to massive mailed shoulders, the silver whirlwind of the Off-Right Band, the blood-red trident of the Gobal, the forked lightning of the Grainland, and the hooked axe of the Algol, the iron fist of the Daimon, and the red blood-stained fist of the Noman. And there were skulls. The horned skull of the Dovol, and the piled human skulls of the Gargael, and the skull cloven by a scythe-curved sword of the Jinnen, and the dagger-pierced skull of the Banshin. Trollocs liked skulls, if they could be said to like anything. It seemed the 12 principal bands might all be involved, and some of the lesser. He saw pins he did not recognize, what seemed a staring eye, a dagger-pierced hand, a man-shape wrapped in flames. They neared the outbuildings, where swords were beginning to thrust through the thatch, as the Saldaeans tried to cut ways onto the roofs. Thatch was tough. They would need to work desperately hard. Odd the thoughts that came when a madman who wanted to die might well kill you in the next heartbeat. Flows of air pushed the casement in front of him out in a shower of shattered glass and fragmented wood. My hands, Lews Therin panted. Why can't I move my hands? I need to raise my hands. Earth, air, and fire went into a weave Rand did not know. 6 of them at once. Except that as soon as he saw the spinning, he did know. Blossom of fire. 6 vertical red shafts appeared among the Trollocs, 10 feet tall and thinner than Rand's forearm. The nearest Trollocs would be hearing their shrill whine, but unless memories had been passed down from the War of the Shadow, they would not realize they were hearing death. Lews Therin spun the last thread of air, and fire blossomed. With a roar that shook the manor house, each red shaft expanded in a heartbeat to a disk of flame 30 feet across. Horned heads and snouted heads flew into the air, and pinwheeling arms, booted legs, and legs that ended in paws or hooves. Trollocs 100 paces and more away from the explosions went down, and only some got up again. Even as he was spinning those webs, Lews Therin spun 6 others. Spirit touched with fire, the weave for a gateway, with any added touches of earth, so and so. The familiar silvery blue vertical streaks appeared, spaced out not far from the manor house, ground Rand knew well, rotating into, not openings, but the misty back of a gateway, 4 paces by 4. Rather than remaining open, they rotated shut again, opening and shutting continuously. And rather than remaining fixed, they sped toward the Trollocs. Gateways, and yet not. Death gates. As soon as the death gates began to move, Lews Therin knotted the webs, a loose knotting that would hold only for minutes before allowing the whole weave to dissipate, and began spinning again. More death gates, more blossoms of fire, rattling the walls of the house, blowing Trollocs apart, flinging them down. The first of the speeding death gates struck the Trollocs and carved through them. It was not just the slicing edge of the constantly opening and closing gateways. Where a death gate passed, there simply were no Trollocs remaining. My hands, the madman howled.
My hands!
Slowly, Rand raised his hands, stuck them through the opening. Immediately, loose there wove fire and earth in intricate combination, and red filaments flashed from Rand's fingertips, 10 from each fanning out. Arrows of fire, this, he knew. As soon as those vanished, more appeared, so fast they seemed to flicker rather than actually go away. Trollocs, struck by the filaments, jerked as flesh and blood, heated in a flash beyond boiling, erupted, jerked and fell, holes blown entirely through their thick bodies. Often 2 or 3 behind fell victim as well before a filament died. He spread his fingers and moved his hands slowly from side to side, spreading death across the whole line. Blossoms of fire appeared that were not his weaving, and death gates, slightly smaller than Luz Theron's, and arrows of fire that must have been Logain's. The other Ashaman were paying attention, but few would be where they could see those last 2 webs spun. Trollocs fell by the hundreds, the thousands, riven by lightning bolts and balls of fire, blossoms of fire, and death gates and arrows of fire. The earth itself exploding beneath their feet, yet on they raced, roaring and waving their weapons, Myrddraal riding close behind, black-bladed swords in hand. As they reached the outbuildings, some of the Trollocs surrounded them, pounding on the doors with their fists, prying at the boards of the walls with their swords and spears, tossing flaming torches onto the thatched roofs. Saldeans up there, working their horse bows as fast as they could, kicked the torches back down, but some hung up on the edges of the roof and flames began catching even on damp thatch. The fires, Rand thought at Luz Theron. The Saldeans will burn. Do something. Luz Theron made no reply, only wove death as fast as he could and hurled it at the Trollocs, death gates and arrows of fire. A Myrddraal, riddled by half a dozen red filaments, was flung from its saddle, then another. A third lost its head to an arrow of fire and an explosion of boiled blood and flesh, but that one rode on, waving its sword, as if it did not know it was dead. Rand was seeking them out. If the Myrddraal were all killed, the Trollocs might well turn and run. Death gates and arrows of fire only, Luz Theron spun now. The mass of Trollocs was too close to the manor house for blossoms of fire. Some of the Ashaman apparently did not realize that right away. The room shook to great booms. The whole manor house shook, as if struck by huge sledgehammers, shook as though about to shake apart. And then there were no more explosions, except where a fireball erupted, or the ground itself exploded to throw Trollocs like broken toys. The sky seemed to rain lightning. Silver blue bolts struck continuously so close to the house that the hair on Rand's arms and chest tried to lift, the hair on his head. Some of the Trollocs succeeded in forcing open the doors of the barns and began flooding inside. He shifted his hands, cutting down those still outside with flickering red filaments that blew holes in them. Some had managed to get inside, but those the Saldeans would have to deal with themselves. On another barn and a stable, flames were beginning to ripple up the thatch, men coughing from the acrid smoke as they shot their bows. Listen to me, Luz Theron. The fire. You must do something. Luz Theron said nothing, just spun its webs to kill Trollocs and Myrddraal. Logain! Rand shouted. The fires! Put them out! The other man did not answer either, but Rand saw the weaves that pulled the heat from the flames, killing them. They just vanished, leaving behind cold, blackened thatch where not even tendrils of smoke rose. Death walked among the Trollocs, but they were so close that even the explosions of fireballs rattled the house now. Suddenly there was a Myrddraal afoot beside the window, pale, eyeless face as calm as an Aes Sedai's, black sword already stabbing toward him. 2 thrown Aiel spears took it in the chest, and a throwing knife blossomed in its throat, but it only staggered before resuming the thrust. Rand bunched his fingers together, and just before the blade reached him, 100 arrows of fire ripped through the Myrddraal, flinging it back 20 paces to lie riddled and leaking black blood onto the ground. Myrddraal seldom died right away, but this one never twitched. Hurriedly, Rand searched for more targets, but he realized that Luz Theron had stopped channeling. He could still feel the goosebumps that told him Cadsuane and Olivia held the power, still feel Sayadine and Logain, but the other man was weaving no more webs either. Outside, the ground lay carpeted with bodies and parts of bodies from the fields almost to the manor house walls. Within paces of them, a few horses belonging to Myrddraal still stood, one holding up a foreleg as if it were broken. A headless Murkrow
Hey,
staggered
Soy,
about,
how you
flailing
doing?
wildly with his sword, and here and there a Trolloc jerked or tried to lift itself and failed, but nothing else moved. It's done, he thought. It's done, Luthern. You can release Sayadine now. Harlan and Delilah were standing on the table, veiled and spears in hand. Min stood beside them, her face grim, a throwing knife in either hand. The bond was full of fear, and not for herself, he suspected. They had saved his life, but he had to save it himself. A close run thing.
Oh yeah,
Logan
safety
muttered.
meeting time.
This had happened before I arrived. A close run thing. He gave himself a shake and released the source, turning away from his glassless window. Did you intend keeping these new weaves for your favorites like Tying? Those gateways. Where did we send those Trollocs? I just copied your weave exactly. It doesn't matter where they went, Rand said absently. His attention was focused on Luthern. The madman, the bloody voice in his head, drew a little deeper on the power. Let go, man. Shadow Spawn can't survive passing through a gateway.
I want to run.
Luthern said.
I want to join you.
If you really wanted to die, why did you kill Trollocs? Rand thought. Why kill that Murkrow? People will find groups of dead Trollocs and maybe Murkrow without a mark on them, he said aloud.
I seem to remember dying.
Luthern murmured.
I remember how I did it.
He drew deeper still, and small pains grew in Rand's temples. Not too many in any one place, though. The destination shifts every time a death gate opens. Rand rubbed at his temples. That pain was a warning. He was close to the amount of Sayadine he could hold without dying or being burnt out. You can't die yet, he told Luthern. We have to reach Tarmangaiden or the world dies.
A death gate,
Logan said, his voice tinged with distaste.
Why are you still holding the power?
He asked suddenly.
And so much. If you're trying to show me that you're stronger than I am, I already know it. I saw how large your death gates were compared to mine. And I'd say you're holding every drop of Sayadine that you can safely.
That certainly caught everyone's attention. Min tucked her knives away and leapt down from the table, the bond suddenly so full of fear it seemed to throb with it. Harlan and Delilah exchanged worried glances, then went back to staring out the windows. They did not trust Trollocs to be dead until the corpses were 3 days buried. Olivia took a step toward him, frowning, but he shook his head slightly and she turned back to her window, though her frown remained. Cadsuane glided down the room, her smooth face sternly composed.
What does he feel?
She demanded of Min.
Don't toy with me, girl. You know the cost of that. I know that he bonded you, and you know I know. Is he afraid?
He's never afraid, Min said. Except for me or... She set her jaw stubbornly and folded her arms beneath her breasts, fixing Cadsuane with a glare that dared the Green Sister to do her worst. By the tangled mix of emotions ranging from fear to shame that she tried to keep out of the bond and failed, she had some idea of what Cadsuane's worst could be. I'm standing under your nose, Rand said. If you want to know how I feel, ask me. Luthern, he thought. His answer, and the Sayadine filling him, did not slacken. His temples began to throb.
Well,
Cadsuane said impatiently. I feel right as well, Water. Luthern. But I have a rule for you, Cadsuane. Don't threaten Min again. In fact, leave her alone altogether.
well, the boy shows some teeth.
Golden birds and fish, stars and moons, swayed as she shook her head.
Just don't show too many. And you might ask the young woman whether she wants your protection.
Strangely, Min had shifted her frown to him, and the bond was threaded with irritation. Right, it was bad enough that she did not like him worrying about her, Now she seemed to want to take on Cadswain single-handed, something he would not be eager to do himself.
We can die at Common Garden,
Luce Theron said, and suddenly the power drained out of him. Be released, Logan said, as if he were suddenly on Cadswain's side. I knew, she told him. He whipped his head around in surprise. Min can deal with you in your own way if she wishes, Rand said, starting for the door. But don't threaten her.
Yes, he thought. We can die from the garden.
Chapter 20. The Golden Crane. The wind had died away as the rain diminished, but gray clouds still hid the sun. The fine drizzle was enough to dampen Rand's hair, however, and begin soaking into his gold-embroidered black coat as he walked through the dead trollocs. Logain had spun a shield of air so that raindrops bounced from it, or apparently slid down nothing to cascade around him. But Rand refused to risk Luce Theron seizing Saidin again. The man had said he could wait until the last battle to die, but how far could you trust a madman on anything?
Madman?
Luce Theron whispered.
Am I any madder than you?
He cackled with wild laughter. Now and then, Mandera looked over her shoulder at Rand. A tall, sinewy woman, her graying hair hidden beneath her brown shufa. She led the maidens, those on this side of the dragon wall at least, but she had chosen to lead his bodyguard of maidens personally. Her green eyes, all he could see of her sun-dark face above her black veil, carried little expression, yet he was sure she was worried over him not protecting himself from the rain. Maidens noticed what seemed out of the ordinary. He hoped she would keep quiet.
You have to trust me,
Luce Theron said.
Trust me. Oh, wait, I'm feeling with a voice in my head. I must be mad.
Mandera and the rest of the 50 veiled maidens made a large ring around Rand, almost shoulder to shoulder, prodding their spears into every trolloc and murdrol they passed, casually stepping over huge severed arms and legs, severed heads, bearing horns or tusks or sharp teeth. Occasionally a trolloc groaned or feebly tried to crawl away, or to lunge at them, snarling, but not for long. War with trollocs was like war with rabid dogs. You killed them or they killed you. There was no parley, no surrender, no middle ground. Rain had kept the vultures away so far, yet crows and ravens flapped everywhere, black feathers glistening wetly, and if any were the Dark One's eyes, it did not stop them alighting to pluck out Trollocs' eyes, or see whether they could wrench loose some other gobbet. Enough of the Trollocs had been torn apart that the birds had rich feasting. None went near any dead murdrol, though, and they shunned Trollocs too near a murdrol. That indicated nothing beyond caution. Very likely the murdrol smelled wrong to the birds. A murdrol's blood would etch steel if left on it very long. To ravens and crows, it must have smelled like poison. The surviving Salveians shot the birds with arrows or skewered them on their sinuously curved swords, or simply bludgeoned them with shovels or hoes or rakes, anything that could make a handy club. In the borderlands, leaving a crow or raven alive was unthinkable. There, they were all too often the Dark One's eyes. Yet there were too many. Hundreds of black-feathered shapes lay crumpled among the Trollocs, and for every corpse there seemed to be hundreds more squabbling loudly over the softer bits, including pieces of their dead fellows. The Ashaman and Aes Sedai had long since given up trying to kill them all. I don't like my men tiring themselves this way, Logan said. His men. Or the sisters, for that matter. Gabrella and Thelvain will be near exhaustion by nightfall. He had bonded the two Aes Sedai, so he should know. What if there's another attack? All around the manor house and outbuildings, brief fires flared, so hot that people shielded their eyes against them, as Aes Sedai and Ashaman incinerated Trolloc and murdrol dead where they lay. There were too many to afford the labor of gathering them into heaps. With fewer than 20 Aes Sedai, fewer than a dozen Ashaman, and maybe 100,000 Trollocs, it was going to be a long job. Very likely, before it was done, the stench of decay would be added to the already foul odors in the air, the fetid coppery smell of shadow-spawn blood, the stink of whatever had been in the Trollocs' intestines when they were ripped open. Best not to think too closely on that. There might not be a farmer or villager left alive between the manor house and the spine of the world. That had to be where the Trollocs had come from, the waygate outside Stedding Shanghai. At least Loyal's home itself was safe. Neither Trollocs nor Murdrol would enter a steading unless driven, and it required considerable driving. Would you rather let them rot where they are? Cadsuane inquired, sounding as if she herself had no preference in the matter. She held her green skirts up so the silk did not trail in the blood-soaked mud or the offal that littered the ground, yet she stepped over legs and around heads as casually as did the maidens. She also had woven a parasol against the rain, as had Olivia, although not until she saw the green do so. Rand had tried to make the sisters sworn to him teach the Shang-Chen woman more about the power, but to their minds, that had nothing to do with their oaths of fealty. She was safe to herself and seemed safe to others, and they were content to leave matters as they were. Nynaeve had refused too, because of Min's viewing. Cadsuane had clearly informed him that she was not in the business of instructing the wilders. This truly would be a charnel house then, Min said. Her walk had a fetching sway to it, though she was plainly trying not to think of what lay underfoot, while avoiding planting a heeled blue boot on any of it at the same time, and that made her stumble now and again. She was getting wet, too, the ringlets beginning to cling to her head, though the bond carried no hint of vexation, only anger, and that seemed directed at Logain from the sharp stare she was giving him. Where would the servants go, and the people who worked the fields and stables and barns? How would they live? There won't be another attack, Rand said. Not until whoever sent this one learns it failed. And maybe not then. This is all they sent. The Murdrol wouldn't have attacked piecemeal. Logain grunted, but he could not argue with that. Rand looked back toward the manor house. In some places, dead Trollocs lay right at the foundations. None had made it inside, but Logain was right, he thought, surveying the carnage. It had been a close-run thing. Minus the Ashima and the Aes Sedai Logain had brought, the end might well have been different. A very close-run thing. And if there was another attack later? Plainly someone knew Ishamael's trick, or that blue-eyed man in his head really could locate him. Another attack would be larger, that or come from some unexpected direction. Perhaps he should let Logain bring a few more Ashaman.
You should have killed them.
Lutheran wept.
Too late now, too late.
The source is clean now, fool, Rand thought. Yes, Lutheran replied. But are they?
And I.
Rand had wondered that about himself. Half of the double wound in his side had come from Ishamael, the other half from Podden Thane's dagger that carried the taint of Shadowlogan. They often throbbed, and when they did, they seemed alive. The circle of maidens parted slightly to let through a white-haired serving man with a long, sharp nose who looked even frailer than Ethan. He was trying to shelter beneath a two-tiered seafolk parasol missing half its fringe, of all things, but the aged blue silk had several ragged holes worn in it, so small rivulets fell on his yellow coat and one on his head. His thinning hair clung to his skull and dripped. He seemed wetter than if he had gone without. Doubtless one of Elgaren's forebears had obtained the thing somehow as a memento, but the obtaining must have been a story in itself. Rand doubted the seafolk gave up a clan wave mistress's parasol lightly.
My lord dragon, the old man said with a bow that spilled more water down his back. Baron Sedai instructed me to give this to you straight away.
From beneath his coat he produced a paper, folded and sealed. Rand hastily stuffed it into a pocket of his own coat against the rain. Ink ran easily. Thank you, but it could have waited till I returned to the house. Best you get back inside before you're soaked through completely. She did say straight away, my Lord Dragon. The fellow sounded offended. She is Aes Sedai. At Rand's nod, he bowed again and started slowly back toward the manor house, his back stiff with pride, the parasol showering him with streams of water. She was Aes Sedai. Everyone hopped for Aes Sedai, even in Tyr, where they were not much liked. What did Vern have to say that she needed to put in a letter? Thumbing the seal, Rand walked on. His destination was one of the barns, its thatched roof partially blackened. This was the barn the Trollocs had gotten into. A burly fellow, in a rough brown coat and muddy boots, leaning against a jamb in the open doors, straightened and for some reason hastily looked inside over his shoulder as Rand approached, the maidens spreading out to surround the barn. He stopped dead in the doorway, Min and the others halting beside him. Logang groaned an oath. A pair of lanterns hanging from uprights that supported the loft gave a dim light, enough to see that every single surface was thick with crawling flies, even the straw-covered dirt floor. As many more buzzed around in the air, it seemed. Where did they come from? Rand asked. Algarn might not be wealthy, yet his barns and stables were kept as clean as such places could be. The burly man gave a guilty start. He was younger than most of the servants in the house, but his head was bald halfway back, and creases, bracketed his wide mouth, fanned out from his eyes. Don't know, my lord, he muttered, knuckling his forehead with a grimy hand. He focused on Rand so hard that it was plain he did not want to look into the barn. I stepped to the door for a breath of fresh, and when I turned around, they was all over everything. I thought maybe they's dead flies. Rand shook his head in disgust. These flies were all too alive. Not every Saldaean defending this barn had died, but all of the Saldaean dead had been gathered here. Saldaeans disliked burials in rain. None of them could say why, but you just did not bury people while it was raining. 19 men lay in a neat row on the floor, as neat as it could be when some were missing limbs or had their heads split open. But they had been laid out carefully by their friends and companions, their faces washed, their eyes closed. They were why he had come here, not to say goodbye or anything sentimental. He had not known any of these men more than to recognize a face here and there. He had come to remind himself that even what seemed a complete victory had its cost in blood. Still, they deserved better than to be crawling with flies. I need no reminders, Luce Theron growled. I'm not you, Rand thought. I have to harden myself. Logang, get rid of these bloody things, he said aloud. You're harder than I ever was, Luce Theron said. Suddenly he giggled. If you're not me, then who are you? Now I'm a flaming fly whisk, Logang muttered. Rand rounded on him angrily, but Olivia spoke in that slurred drawl before he could get a word out. Let me try, my lord, she asked in a manner of speaking, but like an Aes Sedai, she did not wait for permission. His skin tingled with goosebumps as she embraced Sayadar and channeled. Flies always took shelter from even the lightest rain because one raindrop was enough to put a fly in the ground, easy prey until its wings dried off. Yet suddenly the doorway was billowing with buzzing flies as if the rain were far preferable to the barn. The air seemed solid with them. Rand batted flies away from his face, and Min covered her face with her hands, the bond heavy with distaste, but they were interested only in flight. In moments, they were all gone. The balding man, staring at Olivia with his mouth hanging open, suddenly coughed and spat out 2 flies onto his hand. Cadswain gave him a look that snapped his mouth shut and sent his rough knuckle flying to his forehead. Just a look, yet she was who she was. So you watch, she said to Olivia. Her dark eyes were fixed on the Seanchan woman's face, but Olivia did not start or stammer. She was much less impressed by Aes Sedai than most people. And remember what I see. I must learn somehow if I am to help the Lord Dragon. I have learned more than you are aware of, but Min made a sound in her throat, very nearly a growl, and the bond swelled with anger, but the yellow-haired woman ignored her. You are not angry with me? She asked Rand, her voice anxious. I'm not angry. Learn as much as you can. You're doing very well. She blushed and dropped her eyes like a girl startled by an unexpected compliment. Fine lines decorated the corners of her eyes, but sometimes it was hard to remember that she was 100 years older than any living Aes Sedai, rather than half a dozen years younger than himself. He had to find someone to teach her more. Randall Thor, Min said angrily, folding her arms beneath her breasts. You are not going to let that woman. Your viewings are never wrong, he broke in. What you see always happens. You've tried to change things and it never worked. You told me so yourself, Min. What makes you think this time can be different? Because it has to be different, she told him fiercely. She leaned toward him as though ready to launch herself at him. Because I want it to be different. Because it will be different. Anyway, I don't know about everything I've seen. People move on. I was wrong about Moraine. I saw all sorts of things in her future, and she's dead. Maybe some of the other things I saw never came true either. It must not be different this time, Luce Theron panted. You promised. A faint scowl appeared on Loghain's face, and he shook his head slightly. He could not like hearing men question her ability. Rand almost regretted telling him about her viewing of him, though it had seemed harmless encouragement at the time. The man had actually asked Aes Sedai to confirm Min's ability, though he had been wise enough to try to keep his doubting from Rand. I cannot see what makes this young woman so vehement for you, boy, Catswain mused. She pursed her lips in thought, then shook her head, ornaments swaying. Oh, you're pretty enough, I suppose, but I just cannot see it. To avoid another argument with Min, she did not call them that, she called them talking, but he knew the difference. Rand took out Baron's letter and broke the blob of yellow sealing wax impressed with the head of a great serpent ring. The Brown sister's spidery hand covered most of the page, a few letters blotted where raindrops had soaked the paper. He walked closer to the nearest lantern. It gave off a faint stink of spoiled oil. As I said, I have done what I can do here. I believe that I can fulfill my oath to you better elsewhere, so I have taken Tomas and gone to be about it. There are many ways to serve you, after all, and many needs. I am convinced that you can trust Catswain, and you certainly should heed her advice. But be wary of other sisters, including those who have sworn fealty to you. Such an oath means nothing to a black sister, and even those who walk in the light may interpret it in ways you would disapprove of. You already know that few see that oath as invoking absolute obedience in all things. Some may find other holes. So whether or not you follow Catswain's advice, and I repeat that you should, follow mine. Be very wary. It was signed simply Baron. He grunted sourly. Few thought the oath meant absolute obedience. It was more like none. They obeyed usually, yet the letter was not always the spirit. Take Baron herself. She warned him against the others doing things he might disapprove of, but she had not said where she was going or what she intended to do there. Was she afraid he might not approve? Maybe it was just Aes Sedai concealment. Sisters kept secrets as naturally as they breathed. When he held out the letter to Cadswain, her left eyebrow twitched slightly. She must have been truly startled to show so much, but she took the letter and held it where the lantern's light illuminated it. A woman of many masks, she said finally, handing the page back. But she gives good advice here. What did she mean by masks? He was about to ask her when Royal and Elder Hammond suddenly appeared in the doorway, each carrying a long-handled axe with an ornately decorated head on his shoulder. The white-haired Ogier's tufted ears were laid back, his face grim. Royal's ears were flickering. With excitement, Rand guessed. It could be difficult to tell.
I trust we are not interrupting.
Elder Hammond said, his ears rising as he looked sadly at the line of bodies. You are not, Rand told him, sticking the letter back in his pocket. I wish I could come to your wedding, Royal, but...
Oh, that's done, Rand,
Boyle said. He must be excited. It was unlike him to interrupt.
My mother insisted. There won't even be time for much of a wedding feast, maybe none. What with the stump and me having to...
The older Ogier laid a hand on his arm.
What?
Boyle said, looking at him.
Oh, yes, of course. Well...
He scrubbed under his broad nose with a finger the size of a fat sausage. Something he was not supposed to be told? Even Ogier had secrets, it seemed. Rand fingered the letter in his pocket. But then so did everyone else.
I promise you this, Rand,
Boyle said.
Whatever happens, I will be there with you at Commandant. Whatever happens. My boy,
Elder Hammond murmured.
I don't think you should...
He trailed off, shaking his head and rumbling under his breath like a distant earthquake. Rand crossed the straw in 3 strides and offered his right hand. Smiling widely, and with an Ogier that meant very wide, Boyle took it in a hand that enveloped his. This close, Rand had to crane his neck to look up at his friend's face. Thank you, Loyal. I can't tell you how much hearing that means to me. But I'll need you before then.
You need me?
Loyal, I've sealed the way gates I know in Kenlin and Kyrian, Ilion and Tyr, and I put a very nasty trap on the one that was cut open near Faldara. But I couldn't find the one near Farmatting. Even when I know there's a way gate actually in a city, I can't find it by myself. And then there are all those cities that don't exist anymore. I need you to find the rest for me, Loyal, or Trollocs will be able to flood into every country at once. And no one will know they're coming until they're in the heart of Andor or Kyrian. Boyle's smile vanished. His ears trembled and his eyebrows drew down till the ends lay on his cheeks.
I can't, Rand,
He said mournfully.
I must leave first thing tomorrow morning, and I don't know when I'll be able to come outside again.
I know you've been out of the steading a long time, Royal. Rand tried to make his voice gentle, but it came out hard. Gentleness seemed a fading memory. I'll speak to your mother. I'll convince her to let you leave after you've had a little rest.
He needs more than a little rest.
Elder Hammond planted the butt of his axe haft on the floor, gripping the axe with both hands, and directed a stern look at Rand. Ogier were peaceful people, yet he looked anything but.
He has been outside more than 5 years. Far too long. He needs weeks of rest in a steading at the least. Months would be better. My mother doesn't make those decisions anymore, Rand. Though truth to tell, I think she's still surprised to realize it. Aerith does. My wife.
His booming voice put so much pride into that word that he seemed ready to burst with it. His chest certainly swelled, and his smile split his face in two. And I haven't even congratulated you, Rand said, clapping him on the shoulder. His attempt at haughtiness sounded false in his own ears, but it was the best he could manage. If you need months, then months you shall have. But I still need an Ogier to find those waygates. In the morning I'll take you all to Steading Shangtai myself. Maybe I can convince someone there to do the job. Elder Hammond shifted his frown to his hands on the axe haft, and began muttering again, too softly to make out words, like a bumblebee the size of a huge mastiff, buzzing in an immense jar in the next room. He seemed to be arguing with himself.
That might take time,
Loyal said doubtfully.
You know we don't like to make hasty decisions. I'm not certain they will even let a human into the steading because of the stump. Rand, if I can't come back before the last battle, you will answer my questions about what happened while I was in the steading, won't you? I mean, without making me drag everything out of you.
If I can, I will, Rand told him. If you can, Ruth Theron snarled. You agreed we could finally guide Tarmangaiden. You agreed, madman. You'll answer your questions to your heart's delight, Loyal, Min said firmly. If I have to stand over him the whole while. Anger suffused the bond. She really did seem to know what he was thinking. Elder Hammond cleared his throat.
It seems to me that I myself am more accustomed to outside than almost anyone except the stonemasons. Yes. In fact, I think I am likely to be the best candidate for your task.
Faugh, Cadswain said. It seems you infect even Ogier, boy. Her tone was stern, but her face was all Aes Sedai composure, unreadable, hiding whatever was passing behind those dark eyes. Loyal's ears went rigid with shock, and he almost dropped his axe, fumbling to catch it.
You? But the stomp, Elder Hammond. The great stomp. I believe I can safely leave that in your hands, my boy. Your words were simple yet eloquent. My advice is don't try for beauty. Keep the simple eloquence and you may surprise quite a few, including your mother.
It seemed impossible that Loyal's ears could grow any stiffer, but they did. His mouth moved, but no words came out. So he was to speak to the stump. What was so secret about that? My Lord Dragon, Lord Gavram has returned. It was Elsa Penfeld who escorted Bashir into the barn. She was a handsome woman in a dark green riding dress. Her brown eyes seemed to grow feverish when they found Rand. She, at least, was one he did not have to worry about. Elsa was fanatical in her devotion. Thank you, Elsa, he said. Best you return to help with the cleanup. There's a long way to go yet. Her mouth tightened slightly, and her gaze took in everyone from Cadswain to the Ogier with an air of jealousy before she offered a curtsy and left. Yes, fanatical was the word. Bashir was a short, slender man in a gold-worked gray coat with the ivory baton of the Marshal General of Saldaea, tipped with a golden wolf's head tucked behind his belt opposite his sword. His baggy trousers were tucked into turned-down boots that had been waxed till they shone despite a light splattering of mud. His recent work had required as much formality and dignity as he could supply, and he could supply a great deal. Even the Sean-Chan must have heard his reputation by now. Gray streaked his black hair and the thick mustaches that curled around his mouth like downturned horns. Dark-tilted eyes sad, he walked right past Rand with the rolling gait of a man more accustomed to a saddle than his own feet. Walked slowly along the line of dead men, staring intently at each face. Impatient as Rand was, he gave him his time to mourn. I've never seen anything like what's outside, Bashir said quietly as he walked. A big raid out of the Blight is 1,000 Trollocs. Most are only a few hundred. Cocoon, you never did guard your left the way you should. Even then, you need to outnumber them 3 or 4 times to be assured you won't go into their cookpots. But there, I think I saw a foreshadowing of Tarmangaiden. A small part of Tarmangaiden. Let's hope it really is the last battle. If we live through that, I don't think we'll ever want to see another. We will, though. There's always another battle. I suppose that will be the case until the whole world turns tinker. At the end of the row, he stopped in front of a man whose face was split almost down to his luxuriant black beard. Ozcon here had a bright future ahead of him, but you could say the same of a lot of dead men. Sighing heavily, he turned to face Rand. The Daughter of the Nine Moons will meet you in 3 days at a manor house in northern Altara, near the border of Andor. He touched the breast of his coat. I have a map. She's already near there somewhere, but they say it isn't in lands they control. When it comes to secrecy, these Sean-Chan make Aes Sedai look as open as village girls. Cadswain snorted. You suspect a trap? Logan eased his sword in his scabbard, perhaps unconsciously. Bashir made a dismissive gesture, but he used his sword too. I always suspect a trap. It isn't that. The High Lady Surath still didn't want me or Manfor to talk to anyone but her. Not anyone. Our servants were mutes, just as when we went to Abu Dar with Loyal.
Mine had her tongue cut out.
Loyal said in tones of disgust, his ears tilting back. His knuckles paled on the haft of his axe. Hammond made a shocked sound, his ears going stiff as fence posts. Altara just crowned a new king, Bashir went on. But everybody in the terrace and palace seemed to be walking on eggshells and looking over their shoulders, Shonjan and Altaran alike. Even Surath looked as though she felt a sword hovering above her neck. Maybe they're frightened of Tarmangag, Rand said, or the Dragon Reborn. I'll have to be careful. Frightened people do stupid things. What are the arrangements, Bashir? The Saldaean pulled the map from inside his coat and walked back to Rand, unfolding it. They're very precise. She will bring 6 Suldam and Demoni, but no other attendants. Olivia made a noise like an angry cat, and he blinked before going on, no doubt uncertain of the free Demoni, to say the least. You can bring 5 people who can channel. She'll assume any man with you can, but you can bring a woman who can't to make the honors even. Min was suddenly at Rand's side, wrapping her arm around his. No, he said firmly. He was not about to take her into a possible trap. We'll talk about it, she murmured, the bond filling with stubborn resolve. The most dire words a woman can say short of "I'm going to kill you," Rand thought.
I'll be right back.
Suddenly he felt a chill. Had it been him? Or Luz Theron? The madman chuckled softly in the back of his head. No matter. In 3 days, one difficulty would be resolved. One way or another. What else, Bashir?
Lifting the damp cloth that lay across her eyes, carefully so she did not catch the bracelet and rings Angreal in her hair, she wore that and her jeweled Turangreal every waking moment now. Nynaeve sat up on the edge of her bed. With men needing healing from dreadful wounds, some missing a hand or an arm, it had seemed petty to ask healing for a headache, but the willow bark seemed to have worked as well, only more slowly. One of her rings, set with a pale green stone that now appeared to glow with a faint internal light, seemed to vibrate continually on her finger, though it did not really move. The pattern of vibrations was mixed, a reaction to Sidar and Sidene being channeled outside. For that matter, someone could have been channeling inside. Catswain was sure it should be able to indicate direction, but she could not say how. Ha! For Cadswain and her supposed superior knowledge. She wished she could say that to the woman's face. It was not that Cadswain intimidated her. Certainly not. She stood above Cadswain. Just that she wanted to maintain some degree of harmony. That was the reason she held her tongue around the woman. The rooms she shared with Lan were spacious, but also drafty, with no casement fitting its window properly, and over the generations the house had settled enough that the doors had been trimmed so they could close all the way, making more gaps to let every breeze whistle through. The fire on the stone hearth danced as though it were outdoors, crackling and spitting sparks. The carpet, so faded she could no longer really make out anything, had more holes burned in it than she could count. The bed with its heavy bedposts and worn canopy was large and sturdy, but the mattress was lumpy. The pillows held more feathers that poked through than they did down, and the blankets seemed almost more darns than original material. But Lan shared the rooms, and that made all the difference. That made them a palace. He stood at one of the windows where he had been since the attack began, staring down now at the work going on outside. Or perhaps studying the slaughter yard the manor house grounds had become. He was so still he might have been a statue, a tall man in a well-fitting dark green coat, his shoulders broad enough to make his waist appear slender, with a leather cord of his hadori holding back his shoulder-length hair, black, tinged with white at the temples. A hard-faced man, yet beautiful. In her eyes he was. Let anyone else say what they would. Only they had best not say it in her hearing. Even Catsway. A ring bearing a flawless sapphire was cold on her right hand. It seemed more likely he was feeling anger than hostility. That ring did have a flaw in her estimation. It was all very well to know someone nearby was feeling angry or hostile, but that did not mean the emotion was directed at you. It's time for me to go back outside and lend a hand again, she said as she stood. Not yet, he told her without turning from the window. Ring or no ring, his deep voice was calm and quite firm. Moiraine used to say a headache was sign she'd been channeling too much. That's dangerous. Her hand strayed toward her braid before she could snatch it down again, as if he knew more about channeling than she. Well, in some ways he did. 20 years as Moiraine's warder had taught him as much as a man could know of Sidon. My headache is completely gone. I'm perfectly all right now. Don't be petulant, my love. There are only a few hours till twilight. Plenty of work will be left tomorrow. His left hand tightened on the hilt of his sword, relaxed, tightened. Only that hand moved. Her lips compressed. Petulant? She smoothed her skirt furiously. She was not petulant. He seldom invoked his right to command in private. Cursed those sea folk for ever thinking of such a thing. But when he did, the man was unbending. Of course she could go anyway. He would not try to stop her physically. She was certain of that. Fairly certain. Only she did not intend to violate her marriage vows in the slightest way, even if she did want to kick her beloved husband's shins. Kicking her skirts instead, she went to stand beside him at the window and slip her arm through his. His arm was rock hard, though. His muscles were hard, wonderfully so, but this was the hardness of tension, as though he were straining to lift a great weight. How she wished she had his bond, to give her hints of what was troubling him. And she laid hands on Mirelle. No, best not to think of that hussy. Greens. They simply could not be trusted with men. Outside, not far from the house, she could see a pair of those black-coated Ashaman and the sisters bonded to them. She had avoided that whole lot as much as possible. The Ashaman for obvious reasons, the sisters because they supported Elida. Yet you could not spend time in the same house with people, even a house as large and rambling as Algarin's, and avoid coming to recognize them. Arl Malavin was a Kyrianan who seemed even wider than he actually was because he stood barely chest-high to Lamb. Donalo Sandomir, a tyrant with a garnet in his left ear, and his gray-streaked beard trimmed to a point and oiled, although she doubted very much that his creased, leathery face belonged to a noble. Malavin had bonded Iceling Noon, a fierce-eyed green who peppered her speech with borderland oaths that sometimes made Land wince. Nynaeve wished she understood them, but he refused to explain. Sandomir's captive was Ayako Norsoni, a diminutive white with wavy waist-length black hair who was nearly as brown-skinned as a Damani. She seemed shy, a rarity among Aes Sedai. Both women wore their fringed shawls. The captives almost always did, perhaps as gestures of defiance. But then they seemed to get on strangely well with the men. Often Nynaeve had seen them chatting companionably, hardly the behavior of defiant prisoners. And she suspected that Roseanne and Gabriella were not the only pair sharing a bed outside wedlock. It was disgraceful. Suddenly fires bloomed below, 6 enveloping dead Trollocs in front of Malavin and Iceland, 7 in front of Sandomir and Ayako, and she squinted against the blinding glare. It was like trying to look at 13 noonday suns blazing in a cloudless sky. They were linked. She could tell from the way the flows of Sidar moved, stiffly, as though they were being forced into place rather than guided. Or rather, the men were trying to force them. That never worked with the female half of the power. It was pure fire, and the blazes were ferocious, fiercer than she would have expected from fire alone. But of course they would be using Sidene as well, and who could say what they were adding from that murderous chaos? The little she could recall of being linked with Rand left her with no desire ever again to go near that. In just a few minutes the fires vanished, leaving only low heaps of grayish ash lying on seared earth that looked hard and cracked. That could not do the soil much good. You can't find this very entertaining, Lan. What are you thinking? Idle thoughts, he said, his arm hard as stone beneath her hand. New fires flared outside. Share them with me? She managed to put a hint of question in that. He seemed amused by the nature of their vows, yet he absolutely refused to follow the smallest instruction when they were alone. Requests he granted instantly, well, most of the time, but the man would quietly leave his boots muddy till the mud flaked off if she told him not to track in mud. Unpleasant thoughts, but if you wish. The Murdral and Trollocs make me think of Tarman Gaiden. Unpleasant thoughts indeed. Still staring out the window, he nodded. There was no expression on his face. Man could teach Aes Sedai about hiding emotions, but a touch of heat entered his voice. It's coming soon, Nynaeve. Yet Althor seems to think he has forever to dance with the Shongshan. Shadow Spawn could be moving down through the blight while we stand here, down through... His mouth snapped shut. Down through Malkir, he'd almost said. Dead Malkir, the murdered land of his birth. She was sure of it. He went on as if he had not paused. They could strike at Shinar, at the whole borderlands, next week, or tomorrow. And Althor sits reading his Shongshan schemes. He should send someone to convince King Esar and the others to return to their duty along the Blight. He should be marshalling all the force he can gather and taking it to the Blight. The last battle will be there, and at Shaiol Ghul. The war is there. Sadness welled up in her, yet she managed to keep it out of her voice. You have to go back, she said quietly. At last he turned his head, frowning down at her. His clear blue eyes were so cold. They held less of death than they had, of that she was certain, but they were still so cold. My place is with you, heart of my heart, ever and always. She gathered all of her courage and held on to it hard, so hard that she ached. She wanted to speak fast, to get the words out before courage failed, but she forced herself to a steady tone and an even pace.
The bond heavy.
And later she was leaning on his broad chest to catch her breath while he stroked her hair. Perhaps we can have one last night together in Shinar, he murmured softly. It may be some time before we're together again, and I'll miss having my back clawed. Her face grew hot, and she pushed away from him unsteadily. The grooms were done and staring very pointedly at the straw-covered floor, but they might well be close enough to overhear. I think not. She was proud that she did not sound breathless. I don't want to leave Rand alone with Olivia that long. He trusts her, Nynaeve. I don't understand it, but there it is, and that's all that matters. She sniffed, as if any man knew what was good for him. Her stout mare whickered uneasily as they rode among dead Trollocs to a patch of ground not far from the stable that she knew well enough to leave a gateway. Mandar, the trained warhorse, reacted not at all to the blood and the stench and the huge corpses. The black stallion seemed as calm as his rider, now that Lan was on his back. She could understand that. Lan had a very calming effect on her, too. Usually. Sometimes he had exactly the opposite effect. She wished they could have one more night together. Her face grew hot again. Dismounting, she drew on Sidar without using the Angreal and wove a gateway just tall enough for her to lead Lover's Knot through onto grassland, dotted with thickets of black-spotted beech, and trees she did not recognize. The sun was a golden ball, only a little down from its peak, yet the air was decidedly cooler than in Tyr. Cold enough to make her gather her cloak, in fact. Mountains topped with snow and clouds rose to the east and north and south. As soon as Lan was through, she let the weed dissipate and immediately wove another gateway, larger, while she climbed into her saddle and settled the cloak around her again. Lan led Nandar a few steps westward, staring. Land ended abruptly in what was obviously a cliff, no more than 20 paces from him, and from there oceans stretched to the horizon. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, turning back. This isn't Shinar. It's World End in Saldaea, as far from Shinar as you can get and still be in the borderlands. I told you I would take you to the borderlands, Lan, and I have. Remember your oath, my heart, because I surely will. And with that, she dug her heels in the mare's flanks and let the animal bolt through the open gateway. She heard him call her name, but she let the gateway close behind her. She would give him a chance to survive.
Only a few hours past midday, less than half a dozen tables were occupied in the large common room of the Queen's Lance. Most of the well-dressed men and women, with clerks and bodyguards standing attentively behind them, were there to buy or sell ice peppers, which grew well in the foothills on the landward side of the Bannacan Mountains, called the Seawall by many in Saldaea. While in Aldragaran had no interest in peppers, the Seawall had other crops and richer. My final prize, he said, waving a hand over the table. Every finger bore a jeweled ring. Not large stones, but fine. A man who sold gems should advertise. He traded in other things as well. Furs, rare woods for cabinet makers, finely made swords and armor, occasionally other things that afforded a good return. But gems brought in the greater part of his profit in any year. I'll come no lower. The table was covered with a piece of black velvet, the better to show off a good portion of its stock. Emeralds, fire drops, sapphires, and best of all, diamonds. Several of those were large enough to interest a ruler, and none was small. None held a flaw either. He was known throughout the borderlands for his flawless stones. Accept it, or someone else will. The younger of the two dark-eyed Ilianers across him, a clean-shaven fellow named Pavel Jarneos, opened his mouth angrily, but the older, Georg Damantanis, his gray-streaked beard practically quivering, laid a fat hand on Jarneos' arm and gave him a horrified look. Aldragaran made no effort to conceal his smile, showing a little tooth. He had been only a toddler when the Trollocs swept down into Melkir, and he had no memories of that land at all. He seldom even thought of Melkir. The land was dead and gone, yet he was glad he had let his uncles give him the Hadori. At another table, Brannigan was in a shouting match with a dark tyrant
I'll be right
wearing
back.
a lace ruff and rather inferior garnets in her ears, the pair of them nearly drowning out the young woman playing the hammered dulcimer on the low platform beside one of the tall stone fireplaces. That lean young man had refused the Hadori, as had Goranellen, who was near Aldragaran's age. Goranellen was bargaining hard with a pair of olive-skinned Altarans, one of whom had a nice ruby in his left ear, and there was sweat on Goranellen's forehead. No one shouted at a man who wore the Hadori and a sword, as Aldragaran did, and they tried to avoid making him sweat. Such men carried a reputation for sudden, unpredictable violence. If he had seldom been forced to use the sword at his hip, it was widely known that he could and would. I do accept, Master Aldragaran, Damantanis said, giving his companion a sidelong glare. Not noticing, Jarneos bared his teeth in what he probably hoped Aldragaran would take for a smile. Aldragaran let it pass. He was a merchant, after all. A reputation was a fine thing when it enhanced your bargaining power, but only a fool went looking for fights. The Ilianer's clerk, a weedy, graying fellow, and also Ilianer, unlocked their iron-strapped coin box under the watchful eyes of their two bodyguards, bulky men with those odd beards that left the upper lip bare, in leather coats sewn with steel discs. Each carried a sword and stout cudgel at his belt. Aldragaran had a clerk at his own back, a hard-eyed Saldaean, who did not know one end of the sword from the other, but he never used bodyguards. Guards on his premises, to be sure, but not bodyguards. That only added its bit to his reputation. And of course, he had no need of them. Once Damantanis had endorsed 2 letters of rights and passed over 3 leather purses packed with gold, Dragoran counted the coins, but did not bother weighing them. Some of those thick crowns from 10 different lands would be lighter than others, yet he was willing to accept the inevitable loss. The Illianers carefully gathered up the stones, sorting them into wash-leather purses that went into the coin box. He offered them more wine, but the stout man declined politely, and they departed with the bodyguards, carrying the iron-strapped box between them. How they were to protect anything burdened so was beyond him. Kayakun was far from a lawless town, but there were more footpads abroad than usual of late. More footpads, more murderers, more arsonists, more of every sort of crime. Not to mention madness of the sort a man just did not want to think of. Still, the gems were the Illianers' concern now. Ruthen had Eldragoran's coin box open. A pair of bearers were waiting outside to carry it, but he sat staring at the letters of rights and the purses. Half again what he had expected to get. Light coins from Altara and Murundi, or no light coins, at least half again. This would be his most profitable year ever. And all due to Jarneos letting his anger show. Damantanis had been afraid to bargain further after that. A wonderful thing, reputation. Master Eldragoran, a woman said, leaning on the table. You were pointed out to me as a merchant with a wide correspondence by pigeon. He noticed her jewelry first, of course, a matter of habit. The slim golden belt and long necklace were set with very good rubies, as was one of her bracelets, along with some pale green and blue stones he did not recognize and so dismissed as worthless. The golden bracelet on her left wrist, an odd affair linked to 4 finger rings by flat chains, and the whole, intricately engraved, held no stones, but the remaining 2 bracelets were set with fine sapphires and more of the green stones. 2 of the rings on her right hand held those green stones, but the other 2 held particularly fine sapphires. Particularly fine. Then he realized she wore a 5th ring on that hand, stuck against one of the rings with a worthless stone. A golden serpent biting its own tail. His eyes jerked to her face, and he suffered his second shock. Her face, framed by the hood of her cloak, was very young, but she wore the ring, and few were foolish enough to do that without the right. He had seen young Aes Sedai before, 2 or 3 times. No, her age did not shock him. But on her forehead, she wore the Kasain, the red dot of a married woman. She did not look Valkyrie. She did not sound Valkyrie. Many younger folk had the accents of Saldaea or Kandor, Arathel or Shinar. He himself sounded of Saldaea, but she did not sound a borderlander at all. Besides, he could not recall the last time he had heard of a Valkyrie girl going to the White Tower. The tower had failed Malkir in need. The Valkyrie had turned their backs on the tower. Still, he stood hurriedly. With Aes Sedai, courtesy was always wise. Her dark eyes held heat. Yes, courtesy was wise. How may I help you, Aes Sedai? Do you wish me to send a message for you via my pigeons? It will be my pleasure. It was also wise to grant Aes Sedai any favors they asked, and the pigeon was a small favor. A message to each merchant you correspond with. Tarman Gaiden is coming soon. He shrugged uneasily. That has nothing to do with me, I said. I am a merchant. She was asking for a good many pigeons. He corresponded with merchants as far away as Shinar. But I will send your message. He would, too, however many birds it required. Only stone-blind idiots failed to keep promises to Aes Sedai. Besides which, he wanted rid of her and her talk of the last battle. Do you recognize this? She said, fishing a leather cord from the neck of her dress. His breath caught, and he stretched out a hand, brushed a finger across the heavy gold signet ring on the cord, across the crane in flight. How did she come by this? Under the light, how? I recognize it, he told her, his voice suddenly hoarse. My name is Nynaeve de Almira Mandragoran. The message I want sent is this. My husband rides from World's End toward Tarwin's Gap, toward Tarman Guyton. Will he ride alone? He trembled. He did not know whether he was laughing or crying, perhaps both. She was his wife? I will send your message, my lady, but it has nothing to do with me. I'm a merchant. Malkir is dead. Dead, I tell you. The heat in her eyes seemed to intensify, and she gripped her long, thick braid with one hand. Lan told me once that Malkir lives so long as one man wears the Hadori in pledge that he will fight the shadow. So long as one woman wears the Kaisan in pledge that she will send her sons to fight the shadow. I wear the Kaisan, Master Aldragoran. My husband wears the Hadori. So do you. Will Lan Mandragoran ride to the last battle alone? He was laughing, shaking with it, and yet he could feel tears rolling down his cheeks. It was madness, complete madness, but he could not help himself. He will not, my lady. I cannot stand surety for anyone else, but I swear to you under the light and by my hope of rebirth and salvation, he will not ride alone. For a moment she studied his face, then nodded once firmly and turned away. He flung out a hand after her. May I offer you wine, my lady? My wife will want to meet you. Alida was Saldaean, but she definitely would want to meet the wife of the uncrowned king. Thank you, Master Aldragoran, but I have several more towns to visit today, and I must be back in Tyr tonight. He blinked at her back as she glided toward the door, gathering her cloak. She had several more towns to visit today, and she had to be back in Tyr tonight. Truly, Aes Sedai were capable of marvels. Silence hung in the common room. They had not been keeping their voices low, and even the girl with the dulcimer had ceased playing her hammers. Everyone was staring at him. Most of the Outlanders had their mouths hanging open. Well, Mannigan, Goranellan, he demanded, do you still remember who you are? Do you remember your blood? Who rides with me for Tarwin's Gap? For a moment he thought neither man would speak, but then Goranellan was on his feet, tears glistening his eyes. The golden crane flies for Tarman-Guyton, he said softly. The golden crane flies for Tarman-Guyton, Mannigan shouted, leaping up so fast he overturned his chair. Laughing, Aldragoran joined them, all three shouting at the top of their lungs. The golden crane flies for Tarman-Guyton! Chapter 21. Within the Stone.
All right, everyone. Gonna call into this stream for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all's support. And yeah, I appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.